Yes, I would like to share learnings from coaching more than 50 teams of entrepreneurs and illustrate why organizations that bet on entrepreneurship, I think, are making steps towards better futures. So I'm Nicolas, design director with Hiveworks, which is a consultancy based in London and Paris. But I've joined Hiveworks only recently, and before I was with Numa, that some of you may know because that's where the first Intersection conference was held some years ago. So Numa is a startup accelerator and a consultancy that uses their expertise in design and entrepreneurship principles to help organizations with their innovation endeavors, from strategy to practically implementing them. And there, my team and I have, as Guru said, coached many teams of entrepreneurs. So first of all, to create new businesses, which is the traditional reason for which entrepreneurship was cornered and thought. So B2B, B2C, only in France or global businesses across many industries. But not only private businesses, also we helped coach government startups. In this case, it's civil servants that build projects, typically to digitize services. One example is helping foreign students obtain quicker working permits in France when they apply. And the final thing that's not often mentioned is to help also internal services and products to be built through entrepreneurship, typically for IT or HR. An example can be a tool that was developed in a French utility to help managers that have many teams across many different locations to go with their daily work. So the idea of entrepreneurship, as the word suggests, is to make employees entrepreneurs. The question can be, what does it actually cover, and is it not too risky to bet on employees to be entrepreneurs? Because indeed, it's a long process. So a team of intrapreneurs will have to build from a very risky idea full of hypotheses through several stages, refining it and building it. And then will come the time to growth, acquire users, and eventually maybe be optimized and stable and not be called an innovation endeavor anymore. So, yeah, are there more safer ways to build these projects? Of course, there are. It's possible to bet on external resources, typically innovation consultants, that will bring seasoned expertise in building businesses, typically from strategy, entrepreneurship, and design. And it's also possible to altogether avoid the need to build the product or service and acquire an external business. However, I think it misses 2 points. The first point is that there are actually employees that are entrepreneurs inside organizations, and even if they haven't yet built an organization or a product, they will start with the right skills and then learn as any entrepreneur as the project goes. And so these people are often talented. They want to fight against the status quo, and not creating the space and the framework for them to develop these qualities and these aspirations can simply make them leave the organization and build typically a competitor service to your own organization. So that's one thing. But it misses a deeper point, I think, too, is that it's not only about building long-term growth levers. It's not only about the disruptive business that's going to save your organization in the long term. I think entrepreneurship is also about seizing adjacent business opportunities. It's about constantly improving and transforming the current way the business is going, the way it engages with users, the way it uses resources. And this is simply not scalable by using external resources. Employees are many, they're here, they know the business, they know the operations, they are on the field where the change should take place. And so we are really in a vision of the sense and respond framework in which their role, because they're at the edge of the organization, is to be the organs of sensing and responding to change, while central is not about building the business because of a nice insight. It's just about leading the group with a vision, with a resource investment, and the right coordination. So my point is, entrepreneurship is important, it is here to stay, and we need to get better at it, because it's difficult. I have seen many projects fail. I have seen many not many, but a few business units in which the word entrepreneurship is simply banned because of failed first experiences. So we need to be better at it, and I think it is possible. I here give you a figure. More than half of the project that we've accompanied have reached success, so to say. It's still risky, of course, but we would consider success a product that has been launched, that is running, that is acquiring users, and that creates revenue or traction. And this is quite a good figure. But more importantly, I've observed individual and collective stories because of entrepreneurships that are important to be told. And so I would like to share this experience, mine and that of my team, in explaining tools, methods that have worked, struggles that remain, and I will do so along three axes that I think are three success factors without which projects of entrepreneurship usually fail. One is about evaluation rules, the right goals, the right stages and gates of evaluation. Second is about team's autonomy. And third is maybe to change the way entrepreneurship is said, not just bet on the projects, but on people. And I will do so also telling stories from the worst I've seen and from the best I've seen. But first, a primer on how these programs typically work. So there's a team in the beginning, usually 2 to 6 members. It's good if they are from several departments to change their perspective. So typically management, but like marketing, sales, technical. And they are given a certain amount of time, 20% to 50%, sometimes more, to work on a project. So in this, the role that's important is the sponsor. The sponsor gives a goal and resources to this team. The typical story is a ideation challenge that took place in the company or a hackathon, and the task is to work on the project. It's not the best formulation for a goal, but that happens. A better formulation is to explore an opportunity defined as a market, a target, a goal for a certain revenue or profitability horizon. And along with this goal and resources is a definition of how the team needs to be coached. The team is usually not alone. So that was our role with Numa, to coach the teams. It's important to see the coach not just as an expert that's able themselves to build a project, but to help the team be empowered and doing it themselves. That's a key skill of the coach, and it's not easy to find often. And finally, the project will be launched, and the team will face regularly a decision board that's made of executives that are able to launch resources and see the progress of the team, assess whether they are online or not, and make the decision of either continue the project, ask the team to refine their copy, or maybe kill the project. One important thing is that along the growth of the project, we really have to have an innovation mindset, which means that it's a jump into uncertainty. And so the key role of the team, basically, or conceptually, is to reduce uncertainty from an initial endeavor that has many hypotheses and then make it grow. Making it grow, meaning reducing the amount of uncertainty and making it a safe business on which it's rational to invest. Conversely, the decision board is able to invest resources as the team is reducing uncertainties. And so the decision board is really, I think, an investment board. That's how it should consider itself. Okay, let's jump to the first success factor, setting clear rules for evaluation. What do I mean by that? Well, quite simply, it's about setting right goals for the project, formulating criteria of evaluations that are first of all, clear to the team, and also aligned with the fact that it is an innovation project. So what's at stake here? I was just talking about it. For the decision board, it's about optimizing an investment. The right decision for an investment board is to support the projects that have shown they have potential, and very importantly, kill the ones that have proven that they don't, to be able to reallocate the resources to more promising projects. And conversely, from the people, from the team's perspective, what's at stake is to be able to focus because they have clear goals and also be respected, feel respected. Why do I talk about respect? Because in practice, what's happening? Several things. First of all, goals are often unrealistic. I have seen decision boards expect 100 million euro revenue on the French market, which is quite difficult to find, or expect sales within the next 3 months on a B2B endeavor, also probably impossible to achieve. And facing this, the teams are simply realizing that they're not going to be able to make it, so they are in a very uncomfortable situation. And it's not to be wished for if the team is to be successful. Another way goals that are set are unrealistic is when all the hopes of the company are set on one project with high visibility. It's like, you are going to save our next 10 years business. It's only one team, only one project, it's risky, it can fail, so it's simply, again, a recipe for internalized failure. Another thing that happens is there's a goal, but it's unstable. I've seen, for example, a team that had been tasked with working on the silver economy opportunity for an insurance business. So already there were, I think, 4 people, more than 50% spent of their time on it, spent 3 weeks doing a lot of desk research, meeting people, going to fairs, starting to have an idea about where they should go, structuring this, sizing the markets. And after 3 weeks, the sponsor realized that the marketing strategy team at the corporate level was working on the company strategy on silver economy. They were to produce a report 6 months later that would state how the company is positioning itself to this opportunity. And so they had to stop their project and work on something very different, typically the franchise market. And the problem here is that the team was realizing that within 6 months, the time for this report to go out, they would have been able to make a business case, start to prototyping it, having probably an MVP and having learned so much about real users, whether the project was working or not. So it was already more valuable insight potentially to the organization than a white paper that we produced. And so it means that the team realizes there that they are more experts at innovation than their decision board, which is supposed to give them the resources. Extremely frustrating. The last thing, continuing with the bad stories, so to say, is when the decision board is unaware or uneducated about how innovation processes go and don't realize that projects are risky projects and that the goals should be set accordingly. A typical example is the IT board that was the board for a team that was working on a service portal. The team presented UX wireframes that had been tested with the users, and the board was surprised that it was not final UI and started making comments on the decisions that had been made from their central expertise point of view. The team understood again that they were more relevant than their managers in setting up this project. So I'm going to present, sort of so as to tackle this kind of problem, a framework that has been effective in the few cases that we've been able to implement it, really. It's something that we hear a lot about, the innovation portfolio, and I will talk about it along this axis of how to help clarify goals for the teams and for the management as to how entrepreneurship or innovation in general should go. 2 steps for an innovation portfolio. 1, set the right goals and the scope for the portfolio. And 2nd, define maturity stages that will be able to map all projects across this portfolio, make decisions at the management or steering committee level, and also clarify things for the teams. To do this, I will talk about a case quite extensively. It's probably the most extensive case I will talk about in this talk. It was a French insurance company that, because of the shifts in the car insurance market, were facing prospects of loss of revenue of several hundred million euros in the next 15 to 20 years. So one decision was to create a B2B unit to capitalize on a little activity that they already had, and saying that B2B would be one way to compensate for this revenue loss. So the BU director had many possibilities, in particular acquire businesses, but he said that innovation should be the main way for this growth driver. And so basically he wanted to create businesses that within 12 to 15 years would generate 200 million revenue. So we helped them, he and his team, as well as the whole business unit, to set up this innovation portfolio with this goal. And that played on 2 levels. First, the decision-making framework, I'm going to talk about now, and an employee engagement approach that will align all the team behind this strategic innovation approach. I'll talk about that later in this presentation. So first step was to define a portfolio goal and scope. So we conducted a first audit, and we were facing 20 different projects already running in the company. The circles here are scale with the revenue potential of the business. This was a company with quite a good innovation culture already. They had many ideas, had launched many projects, but something which was key is that they were not so much goal-driven. And so comparing these projects with the actual target of 200 million revenue, it was obvious that there was no match and that the current projects would never be enough to reach this target. What was more worrisome probably is that neither the management really accurately knew about that, nor the teams. So we had to help them clarify the gap that there was between the current situation and the target. To do this, we set up 2 portfolios, one about growth, which would carry the real long-term revenue target, and one about acquisition and retention to clients. Why this? Because the projects had fuzzy goals. Some were realizing they were aiming for direct revenue, but some were thinking that they would help retain existing clients or acquire new clients, which would indirectly create revenue. Some others were even thinking that the service they were running would help with the brand awareness, which would have even more indirect consequences on the revenue. And because of this ambiguity, every team was pursuing very different goals and not even realizing that the sum of all project potentials was not there. So defining these 2 portfolios was basically about saying a project in the growth portfolio has as a primary indicator the revenue potential in 5 years, while projects in the acquisition retention portfolio have as primary targets indirect revenue through acquisition and retention. Along with these goals, an important factor is to set a scope, and I will talk about this first one. Typically, the growth portfolio here had as criteria that one project should be at least 10 million euro revenue, because it's impossible to have several hundred millions revenue with hundreds of 1 million businesses. It's just not cost-wise possible. And other criteria like on the French market or reasonable investment. Thanks to this, we were able to position the projects on these 2 buckets, and the effect was direct. Teams had finally a clear goal, and typically for the projects here, the teams were relieved because they were trying to both build their service, which was supposed to be a nice experience for the current clients, but they were also trying to monetize it because they were pursuing the growth goal. Monetizing it reduced the experience, degraded the experience of the clients, and so they were realizing it would not be working. For the team's clarification, for the management also, it was already making the portfolio healthier somehow, because some projects were not in the scope, and so they were able to transfer responsibility to other departments or free the resources to invest on other more profitable projects. The goal of 200 million was split between these 2 portfolios, and so there was a first clarification of the big picture. Second step is to define maturity stages. The reason is, so each of these projects is an ongoing endeavor, it's still risky, and it's important to know how far it is from actually achieving revenue. And so we were trying to measure how risky they are and how far from the moment they will actually create the revenue. To do this, we used quite traditional innovation stage definition, but we were very clear, not so much about these stages that I already mentioned, but about the definition of the gates. We had extremely clear criteria and definition of what should be considered, for example, a problem solution fit for a team that enables them to jump their project, their initiative, from a building stage to a stage where the goal would be to acquire users. Along with this, it was possible to have a likelihood of success, so to realize that even if a business is in the opportunity area and has a potential for 50 million euro revenue, it's only, say, 10% likely to succeed. So the contribution to the portfolio is tenfold smaller than the actual potential. And second extremely important factor was to set deadlines. So have duration for each phase, so that a team that has a project in the second phase has only 6 months to prove to the investment committee that it can reach the problem solution fit. Why this? If you consider it in comparison with a venture capitalist model, a startup that raises money has a given amount of time to use this money to jump to the next growth phase. If it doesn't, it means maybe that the team is not right, maybe that the project has no potential for real, and it's basically the same in a corporate environment. The teams will not be dissolved, people will stay in their company, but should be working on more promising projects. So basically we're in a context in a framework in which at the portfolio level, it's a good decision and employees, management should be happy to kill a project because it means that resources can be invested on more promising projects. And so it's a shift of thinking that's quite momentous and not easy to implement. This kind of framework helps. So then we were able to project all the to position all the projects on these two portfolios and maturity stages. At the team level, it's extremely valuable, as I said, because it gives not just the long-term, but the short-term priority and the deadline with which they can go forward. So it helps us launch new initiatives, so populate the initial stages of the pipe, and then contribute to the final potential of the portfolio. And we experienced also a very nice effect to make portfolio more healthy. Once again, there was a team that had been working on a project that was supposed to bring revenue for several months, I think even more than a year. They were realizing that the project did not carry so much potential, and they were sort of struggling because there was political pressure on them to sustain the project. It was deemed key for the company for them to succeed. This framework enabled them to recommend officially to the management to stop, redeploy the resources, and 2 entrepreneurs were able to jump on a new endeavor, much more promising. And this was sort of an indicator of the success of this approach. I'll talk later about what it means for the employees quickly, but here is a real extensive deployment of a portfolio and the benefits I've been talking about are not the only ones. I won't delve into it, but the idea of a portfolio, like for an investment fund or a VC fund, is to answer 2 questions. One is to constantly be able to know whether the portfolio is in line with the final goal. And 2 is to be able to make decisions as to where to invest resources, whether they're people or OPEX and CAPEX. So this is for the first success factor. I'm jumping now to a second success factor, which is the team's autonomy. Autonomy is about making decisions, so we want team, when we talk about autonomy, to be able to decide how the product is going to be evolving, so the design decision, how they want to spend the money and resources that they have been confided to by the decision board. It's a clear articulation with the first challenge. It's only possible to be autonomous if the goals have been clearly stated, the long-term and the local priorities again. So this challenge, this success factor of establishing a team's autonomy goes hand to hand with the first one. And the reason at the core of it is that because they are working themselves on the project, the team is the right place where the decision should be made. It's about making the most relevant and most efficient decision. This quote it represents this. It's because they are at the margin that they have the knowledge of detail, and that should be empowered with the decision. So what's at stake from the business perspective is really about decision-making efficiency, and even more importantly, it's the adaptability of the organization to be able to make these decisions. And on the team's perspective, it's the sense of ownership. Again, it's not easy. Why? 2 kinds of obstacles to autonomy. The first one is pressure, of course, by top management that have a stake in the project. And so as the team is working, you will hear team members that say that such director has knocked at the door to know where the project is headed. But a typical story was a team that was exploring the car-sharing industry for a technological company, and they had come with 2 alternative solutions, and they had to decide which they would recommend to the decision board. These 2 solutions corresponded to 2 technological assets of the company that were managed by 2 different business units. And so each head of the business unit, because of the visibility of the project, the storytelling about it, and the resources that the project would be given, had an interest in the fact that their solution should be taken. So it was really not comfortable for the teams, because practically their careers are impacted, their perception from the rest of the organization, and it's a direct infringement of a rational decision-making, which is what we want to empower them with. Second reason of the difficulty to establish the team's autonomy is when entrepreneurs are part-time. Practically, it's very difficult for them to have a reduced workload on their day-to-day activity. Local managers are not happy about intrapreneurship projects taking their resources because they still have their roadmaps to implement, and they are not given extra people to make them work. So tools, smaller things that help, it's a difficult topic, but things that have seen work, either as quick fixes or more structural answers. First is to have full-time entrepreneurs. That keeps away the local manager. It's more complex to set up, but it makes it more efficient. It asks the question then of where will the entrepreneur go if the project is interrupted? And I think, and this is why there should be several projects, if the project is interrupted, the entrepreneur is able to go on another one. Another alternative is for the entrepreneur to become a coach, an internal coach, to new teams of entrepreneurs. It really helps to scale this endeavor. Avoid high visibility, we talked about it, and explicitly say that the role of the sponsor is not just to give resources and maintain the goal, but to shield the team from external influences in the organization has been helpful. A last thing is a small tool that works better in less mature organizations, I think, but is to control upwards information. A good way is to set up a scorecard that explains all activities that entrepreneurs will be going through, when they are going to be doing them, and to add as week after week, green, orange, red dots, and just describe where the team is with only 3 lines. And that's enough. That's sent to all managers, and usually it helps reduce the stream of external influence. A thing I want to underline is that we say teams should be autonomous, but practically for the teams, it's not easy at all. There are the pressures, and so in practice, when you succeed in shielding them from the management, it can lead to extremely difficult moments. A story is, in the same technological company, but another entrepreneurship team, they had realized after 2 months that the opportunity they were supposed to explore was had not potential. So they had realized after meeting everyone in the value chain that they should consider the problem differently and tell their management that the way the brief had been formulated was not good. And so we had a moment, a workshop at one point, where we were not, I was the coach, there was another coach, we were not able to interact with them anymore. They were so stressed that they should tell their management that in their perception, basically the project had failed. And so what we did was to invite a management coach with specific coaching skills, not just in expertise level, but at like a human understanding of how things go, to help them pass this challenge. So basically, they unpacked their opinions, had a conversation, formulated and affirmed that their recommendation was the good one. But because the conversation was on a certain personal level, they were able to word the fact that they were afraid, and they were able to share with each other that it was about fear. And the second the word fear was pronounced in the room, suddenly it was as if it lost its effect power, and they were able to say, okay, we will take the risk because we are legitimate in making this decision, and we will go forward, which is what happened, and the management was quite acceptant of the decision. They find a way to pivot without pitching it as a failure. So the third success factor is really to help the organization bet on people, not projects. And the story I've just told illustrates that. What's at stake in an entrepreneurship project is not just succeeding or not in building the business. It's a personal transformation for the entrepreneurs, and this should be recognized by the organization. When I interview entrepreneurs after the programs, the main things that come up is they're sharing how importantly collaboration has been compared with day-to-day activities that are usually very solitary, PowerPoint making, reporting making, sitting in meetings that don't have so much point and that don't help people collaborate. Here it was day-to-day building on each other's idea, discussing, disagreeing, and realizing that they can find a consensus. It's unique. Second thing is the common sense of these design and lean principles, meeting users, realizing people are happy to share their experiences and generate insights, that it's not so hard. Prototyping and testing, which lowers the bar in how to implement a project and makes people, employees, realize that they are not in need of thousands of euros or tens of thousands of euros and years of work to make something go forth. And ownership, I've talked about it also. So what's at stake is that the organization, it's a good quote, entrepreneurs saying that basically after such an experience, it's impossible to go back to their day-to-day work. So the organization has to recognize that it is a personal transformation and should organize things accordingly. What can happen if it's not done is pretty bad, because it's not a rational failure on a business scale, it's a personal failure on a very intimate level. A burnout is typically the story where a team had a recommendation for a business. It was 6 people, and because of the pressure and the way that the entrepreneurship went quite bad, 2 of them quit. Two others of them decided to go back to their work. It had been such a stressful moment for them that it was not a good experience, and they came back to their R&D centers. And only 2 remained to actually build the project. No other entrepreneur was onboarded. So there was 2 people, one on the product, another one on the sales, and the amount of pressure and the deadlines were unrealistic, had not been readapted, and one of the ladies basically collapsed and left on a sick leave, never came back to the organization, and had a year later to quit and find another job. So it was probably the worst experience I had coaching entrepreneurs, but that happens. Resignations also, which can be a successful exit for an entrepreneur because they realize that they have learned things and they want to implement them to build their own business. The most cynically funny story is an entrepreneur that basically built a concept with the team of intrapreneurs and 6 months later left because it was not trusting the organization could carry this project, and built a startup that's basically a competitor from the initial mother company. So it's an important stake for a company when they invest in entrepreneurship. Things that help, I'll be quick. For less mature organizations, maybe the best thing to do is to select who's going to enter the program. So we do interviews, we do case studies, we help define according to typically this kind of soft skills here, what makes, or whether the person is an entrepreneur that's going to be able to resist pressures within the organizations. When the organization matures up, it can be too open to many other profiles, but initially that's a good thing. Second thing is to actively and consciously build communities for learning and support. So back to this French insurance I was mentioning earlier, what we did was to help the teams of project holders to define how they wanted to learn as a community and support each other. So it was many workshops and iterations, but basically they came up with 2 meetings, actively trying to help them keep focus, request help from each other, and also get external expertise. So invite entrepreneurs that would share their stories. A continuation of this is when we realized that this could be carried out across several companies. So we set up a series of events and a Slack space where intrapreneurs from different companies could meet, share their experiences, and realize that it was not just about their own company, but it was something quite widespread. So again, a support system that was really working. And finally, I want to share maybe the best experience that I've had in entrepreneurship. What's key for the organization and management is to, once a program has been set up, there are things and bottom-up ideas and propositions that emerge. So typically it's this technological company where we had accompanied 4 entrepreneurship teams. On another level, we had also trained several dozens people, not just on practical projects, but on the principles of design and lean startup. And these people quite spontaneously met inside the organization and decided to be change agents, officially proposing their services for anything that would help the organization transform itself. So they branded themselves mindset accelerators. And at the same time, we were coaching the executive committee on agility principles, several workshops to help them try to steer the organization in a different way. And so it was the opportunity for the ExCom to decide to task this community, this mindset accelerator, with transversal assignments. So it's typically a practical way. For example, they worked on cross incentives to support cross sales, which is typically about going over silos, not an easy thing if you see it from local point of view, or work on the recognition system for employees working on projects compared with their managers. So this kind of project, I think, was the end goal of what we're trying to achieve when we talk about entrepreneurship beyond building successful businesses. A reflexive conclusion, maybe, is I would like to share the fact that coaching entrepreneurs has probably been from the best experiences in my career so far. Not just me, I think the coaches that we've hired to do this, expert designers, expert entrepreneurs, not just do it themselves, but coach employees. In doing so, was transformative to the coaches too. The reason is we are basically witnessing people work with a level of enthusiasm and commitment that they probably had long forgotten, if ever experienced. And of course, it reflects on us as a very good experience. A core reason, I think, and I believe, is we are helping fostering what Manzini would call our most specifically human talents of being able to imagine, design, and build. And so this, I think, should be the experience of everyone in their work, on the day-to-day work. So I think it echoes and gives hope in the framework that Kenneth talked about yesterday. We are witnessing individual transformation thanks to these programs, and they in turn can create collective transformations and maybe systemic transformations. I'd be happy to share about this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas. Any questions, comments, or feedback? There we go.
Hi, Nicolas. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more detail around metrics for performance, knowing full well that it's a problem when execution metrics are applied to innovation efforts. What were you guys using as basic metrics to evaluate the performance of some of these initiatives?
So the best thing is to show you this framework again.
Yeah, especially during the design and the refine stages.
Yeah. So the first thing to us is validated problems. So it's an in-depth understanding of, one, a target, specific user needs, the context in which these needs emerge, the constraints that users have in trying to meet these needs, building a concept of a solution that's been tested at the concept level, so typically storyboard or workflow, something that users give good feedback about. And along with this, a business case that sort of models the business model, the potential revenue, and ticks main criteria of the portfolio scope. At that stage, it's enough to jump into then the build and refinement problem. And yeah.
So one of the other elements that I've seen with entrepreneurs is assumption testing.
Yeah.
And so that one of the ways that you measure their performance is how many assumptions have they identified, what have their testing been, but even at the early stages of when you're in the design stage.
Yeah. Actually, this stage here is still quite an early stage. It's not more than 6 months after the project. So the jump from here to here, we need an MVP with a list of the assumptions that are to be validated. And so in the simplified way of setting it, we need first transactions, so that's the desirability part, but there are also feasibility and viability assumptions that need to be addressed. It's embedded in the decision system, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, there's a question.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. I have a few more questions about the structure of these ventures inside of the companies. So I was curious about where do you raise this money? Is it only internal money, or do you bring in external players? Do you use yield or stuff like this?
Yeah.
Once this money is raised and the venture is going on, do you give incentives to the teams like equity or other benefits like this?
Yeah.
And also, after that, if the project is successful and it becomes a different entity, how does it work? Does it become like a separate company, or did that ever happen before?
Okay. Yeah, of course. So first question is about the funding. Yeah, it depends on the companies. Some launch fully internal programs, and it's fully internally funded. Some try to, when businesses reach a high maturity, try to validate them by external investors, because usually VCs are good at investing whether a business is going to be promising or not. And some others are actually creating so-called startup studios, where the link between the organization and the business is it's purely financial. And so money can be raised absolutely independently by the entrepreneurs from external. And these different options also have consequences on how entrepreneurs are incentivized. When it's fully internal, it's really rare that they have equity in the projects. It's okay, in my opinion, because they have high salaries usually, and so they keep their high salaries even in the early stages. So it's a trade-off. There's a conversation, and if it's okay with them, they can accept this. But of course, it can be painful once the business creates a lot of revenue. So that's one thing. It's possible sometimes that they are absolutely set as spin-offs, and then they have equity or different ways to have benefits in the success of the economic success of the business. Yeah. Was it answering your 3 questions? Yeah, whether it can actually be put out of the mother company. Yeah, that happens. Yeah. The most advanced system is really a startup studio that's 100% owned by the mother organization, but that's completely autonomous. It has its own expert designers and developers, and then they are hiring there's a first stage, internal, which is from the opportunity to a validated problem and business case. And from there on, they hire entrepreneurs to become CEOs of these companies, and then run the projects forth.
Big room, eh?
Hello, thanks. Thanks for the talk. I have a question regarding gates. So, did you find who established these gates within the teams you went towards the management? And did you encounter any conflict regarding existing gated project advancement process in the companies?
Of course.
And if so, how did you manage that thing?
So in this case, the maturity level of the management regarding this was quite low, so it's basically our team that set up these gates. But what practically happens is you have a version 1, and then as the setting up the projects, putting them in the right box, negotiating with the teams on are they, often it's like, have you really validated the problem? Teams thinks they are here and they're actually here, and so it's a negotiation. And this enables to refine the gates, to have a universal scope. Exactly the same thing happens on something I didn't cover here, but that's the portfolio goal and scope is extremely difficult to formulate in a clean way. In practice, in this organization, it took us, I think, more than 6 months to land a clear formulation because of the alignment with other departments and so on. And so it's okay, I think, to accept that for some time the goals are going to remain fuzzy as long as there's constant improvement of them. So I agree, it's like a perfect theoretical picture. In practice, there's energy to be put in the negotiation and setting up. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, great talk. And I just want to underline and agree with you, coaching entrepreneurial teams is the best. I love it. And it goes right to what our presenter before was talking about, empathetic workspaces. The energy lights up. The more an organization becomes intrapreneurial and develops that muscle, the more exciting a place it is to be. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's a fun place. Yeah.
Thank you.
I saw some more hands. Yeah, there we go.
I'm curious about what's the starting point of those entrepreneurship programs, because sometimes clients come with this demand, but sometimes they just ask for us to do the project. So do you twist sometimes the brief like this, or?
Yes. So I was talking about this typical hackathon brief. We don't want to work with that. For us, this opportunity stage here, usually for this company, we defined it's about exploring a zone of opportunity, which means a market that has sufficient size, assets of the company that, from where we stand, we think can be leveraged on this market, and alignment with culture, vision, and overall company strategy. And often it's enough, because silver economy was one of them typically. So it has to be broad enough that we are confident we will find something sizable enough within this opportunity zone. Maybe several can be created, actually. But yeah, it's about sizing. Not too broad. It's not the silver economy. Not too narrow. It's a balance to be found. But yeah, we can structure the definition for that.
Any concluding remarks? If not, then we will end off with a big round of applause. Thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you.